I've written this book called How Painting Happens, subtitle, and Why It Matters, and one couldn't really be in a better place to discuss that than in the middle of this magnificent, wonderful exhibition of paintings, a lot of which were done, I think, probably since I finished the manuscript, which was about this time last year. When you start a picture, you don't have any plan in mind, no sketch, no idea, you just start. Is that right?
Yeah, because I don't want to get, well, I don't want to talk over technical, but years ago I used to, for me painting was like really difficult. And then in 2016, when my mum died, I decided that I was going to stop it from being difficult for me. I was going to make it as simple as possible. So I made a rule that I couldn't repeat an image twice. So I could do the same drawing again and again and again, but every drawing would be different. But what I couldn't do was take a drawing and then blow it up onto a canvas, or make a big drawing and do the same, try to make the same emotional, the same moment again. I had to have a brand new moment. So at the beginning I started thinking, yeah, I'm going to paint a picture of my mum, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. And then after a short while, I never knew what I was doing. It would just be, so for example, I don't want to have sex because my body feels dead. I did not expect to write that. So after I'd written it, I thought, oh, I should paint over that. It's a nice thing that maybe if it comes through, or maybe if it doesn't. And then I realized the statement was so important that I should just keep it. It doesn't matter about whether it's commercially successful. It doesn't matter whether it's a good painting. It was telling me something I needed to see and needed to read and needed to keep seeing. So I've kept it. So the judgment on why I'm doing it is because I want a painting to tell me something I didn't know before, not something I already know. So to answer your question, the more surprises I give myself, the more I learn and the more excited I am by it.
So the final image can be just quite unexpected, or it evolves in the process of painting, is that right?
So this is really, really funny. In the studio, so I can't lift up big canvases like I used to, but me and Harry sometimes moved them across the studio, and sometimes we go, Christ, fucking hell, this one's really heavy. What? And then I look, and on the side of the canvas there's so much paint, because I've painted over it again and again and again, and even though it's a very thin layer of paint, building up 5 layers, say, of thin paint and 5 layers of picture makes the canvas really heavy. And some paintings, like, so nearly all of the ones in this area here, not that one, that's really heavy, and that one's heavy, but the rest are quite light, and especially the one with the text, you can see it's just 2 lots of paint. But if I was to paint over that one, I might draw, I don't know what I'd draw, maybe let's just say a woman laying back. And then I sort of think, that's a bit boring. Or I don't like her leg, so then I get rid of her leg. And then I think, oh, that's kind of a bit odd because it looks like her body's twisting. And then I paint some blue underneath, and I think, oh, that looks like the sea. And then I might paint over her, and then I've suddenly got a canvas that's just blue at the bottom with just the faint words of I don't want coming through, which changes everything, because it's like I don't want blue, I don't want the sea, and then my mind's working differently from before. And then I go on a kind of journey. So my painting isn't boring for me, it's not technical, it's not an exercise, it's not, it's just me, just moving through the canvas and moving through the ideas.
And sometimes you let something which is painted over emerge as a sort of ghostly form underneath, and that sometimes plays a part in the process. Is that?
Yeah, well, it is. It's not. Is it here? No, I don't think it's here. There's a painting that I did with, and there's a couple, and they were there was a bed, a drawing of a bed, and then there was a couple that was painted quite well of them embracing, and the man's kneeling, holding onto the woman. It's sort of quite monk-like, really. But I didn't like the couple because they looked too, I don't know, well, not too monk-like, but too real-like. And so I then and rubbed them out completely, I thought, out of the canvas. And then it looked like that they were in a sort of kind of like a dust whirl of embrace and just kind of moving, or kind of like a ghost couple or something. And I thought, wow, I really like that. It's exciting. And then I painted, oh my God, the painting is here. Harry's pointing. The painting's over there on the far side with the flowery wallpaper with the lamp. I knew it was around somewhere. Anyway, so that painting had a couple embracing, then a couple that was like a sort of whirlwind, and then the whirlwind couple and the bed and then the wallpaper looked really good, and I kept it like that for about a year. But I didn't like, from the whirlwind couple, the man had a really long limb. He had a long calf. You could still see his calf. And I realised that he would be very, very tall, this guy in this picture. Nothing against tall men in this room, but it's not my preference. And so it irritated me, this long limb. So I thought, I couldn't sleep. And it was almost going off to an exhibition. I thought, I can't stand it. I've got to get rid of the long limb. I don't want this man. So then I start getting angry because I don't want this man in my picture with this long limb. So I rubbed them all out. And then it ended up being that painting that's over there, which is me, sort of half child, half woman, with all my guts spilling out, with the ghost of my mum looking on me, over me. So it started off as something completely different. But it's the journey of the painting and not being afraid to paint over it and change it.
And a few years ago, one of your paintings, which started off as two figures on a bed, ended up as a full sailing ship in full sail, sailing across the ocean, which is the most amazing metamorphosis.
Well, it wasn't actually it was two couples, but I don't know if they're in bed, or one couple, two people, but I don't know if they're in bed. But it was a woman being fucked up the arse, well, obviously from behind. Not obviously, actually, but from behind. She was on all fours, and the male figure was behind her, and it was such a brilliant painting. It was so beautiful. It was so good. The colours, everything. And I took these photos of it, and then sent them to Harry and to a few friends. I was in France on my own, and it was about, I don't know, 11 o'clock at night, and I'd had a bottle of wine, and I was really happy, and I thought, I'm so happy with this painting, And then I sent the photos off and everything. And then I opened up another bottle of wine, and then I carried on painting. And I thought, I'd just get rid of this, just put a bit more red in, just put a bit more brown. And I completely destroyed this painting. It was so bad. And then in the morning, when I woke up, this is when I used to drink, I woke up with a terrible hangover. And in the morning, I was getting these messages from Harry going, that painting's brilliant, that painting's fantastic, don't touch it. I was like, oh my God. And it was like 7 in the morning or something, and I ran down to my studio in France is like down a little hill. I ran down to the hill, and I went into the studio, and this painting was so bad. And I looked at my photos, and I'm like, what the fuck have I done? Oh my God. So I was so upset that I had to get rid of the painting altogether and paint over it. So I decided to paint it out black, because sometimes if you've got a very full colour, full thick paint, you don't want white over it because it will still come through. You put black or dark grey, and then you put white on top of that, and then you've just got a very base, and you can even sand it down and make it smooth or whatever. So I started painting it out, and what I did was I turned it upside down because I couldn't stand it, so I just didn't want the image or the drawing or anything. Turned it upside down and started painting this black, like this really aggressively. And I suddenly went back and I thought, oh my God, it's a ship. It's a tall ship sailing through some terrible, storm. oh my God, it's amazing. I love it. It's a tall ship. This is like 8 a.m. after my, oh my God, I love this painting. Oh my God, this is a fantastic tall ship. This is so beautiful. I love this painting. And I have it hanging up in my house in London because I love it. But it's not only a tall ship, it's also a giant cup and saucer sometimes. And then also like a sort of elk or a bull-like creature that is charging through the painting. So I love it because I see all these different things in it. And it is definitely my favourite painting that I've done in like 10 or 15 years. And I know it's really good because every time people come to my house, if they're collectors, they want to buy it, or museums want to show it, or everyone loves it. And I think it's because it's hanging in my house and it's not available. But it isn't just that. It's because there's something magical and mystical about it, and so unexpected and so unplanned and so genuine. And it's just about paint. But it's also about a journey, about a ship going through the sea, going through a storm, which is a great metaphor for life and everything. So.
Yeah, and it's a masterpiece. And by good fortune, it's the one which is in this book, in fact, which we chose. I can't remember the page it's on. I wondered if we could get a bit technical about painting for a moment, because I remember last time we talked about this, you told me you'd realised a little while ago that you were a thin painter, and I suppose every really individual painter has their own relationship with the material. You know, some like thick, some are Leon Kossoff, and like inches of paint. And your painting is thin, and that has consequences. I mean, sometimes it's thin and dilute, and you get these wonderful drips cascading down the canvas, and I suppose you welcome those. Do you actually plan them? Do you know that's going to drip when you?
Yeah, no. If I load the brush up with very thin paint and run it along the canvas, I know there's going to be drips, and but I can control those drips. But I love it actually because when I paint like that, when I put canvases up in the middle of the studio, my cats, they run and they bounce on the back of the drips, and they love watching the drips come down. So I get this sort of double pleasure from it now, which is good. The thin painting thing is really good because when I used to oil paint, I was a thin painter with oil paint, and I put sometimes I put areas of thick paint on, but with the oil painting, when I was at Royal College of Art, I used to paint with lots of terps, lots of linseed oil, and I used to build up a really slow gesso ground for the background, so then it could take all the oil and all the linseed and all the terps and everything, and they used to look like giant watercolours as well. And for years I've painted. When I was pregnant, I couldn't stand the smell of oil paint or terps, and so I stopped painting. In fact, I stopped using those paints, and then I stopped painting for quite a long time. And then when I started painting again, I never went back to using oil paint. I went back to using acrylic, and all my paintings are acrylic. Lots of people don't know that. They think they're oil paint. And there's a real snobbish thing as well. Oil is king, acrylic is like the pauper or the princess or whatever, it's like, but that's just a snobby thing because a lot of acrylic paints now are really fucking expensive, number one. Number two, you get wet acrylic paint as well, so you can manipulate it like oil paint. And the other thing as well, I don't know many people that can use acrylic paint like me, because my way of using it is intentional. I spent 40 years painting, so I know what I'm doing and I know why I want to do it. And the build-up of all the I could build up 100 thin layers to make a painting if I wanted to, and it would still look like it was really fresh with only 2 or 3 colours on it, because that's how I paint. But I mean, I think talking technically it's not boring, but I can talk as technically as you like about painting, but I just don't know how interesting it is.
Well, I think it interests me. Well, one thing that strikes me about these paintings is you've got a balance between that. They're obviously drawing's very important. It's a very important part of what you do, but they're gestural. They're what used to be called painterly. They're visible brushstrokes and washes of paint, as you say, like watercolour and drips, and there's a balance between those two things.
George Baselitz, who I'm friends with, sort of famously said that women can't paint, which was a misquote. He didn't really say. He said he basically said that women don't paint, and I would say people don't paint. You know, it become really wholly unfashionable for people to paint, and to paint gesturally, and to paint emotionally. And when I was at the Royal College of Art and I was a figurative, emotional painter, people treated me like oh, poor Tracey, you know. And everyone was doing their Gertrude Richters and their, you know, whatever. And everybody thought that I had a sort of like, maybe I did actually, but like a mental problem or something about the way that I worked, because I was emotional. But I use the figure, I like drawing, I like emotion, I use myself, I use life. So the whole thing about being a figurative painter is, of course, it suits me. And if I want to get intellectual or academic, I'll write in my own sweet way, because even that is quite emotional, and it's not academic, but it's definitely on an... When I stopped painting, I wrote all the time, because my painting wasn't accepted, and everybody's, George Baselitz, Kiefer, all these neo or expressionist type people back in the late 80s and 90s, their work wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't going in museums, it wasn't being hung on walls, it wasn't being taken seriously, because there was a new trend of, I'd say, highly polished perspex. And you could polish a piece of perspex, put it on the wall, and give the dimensions, and you could write a whole thesis on that and say why it should be on the wall and why it's art. Whereas if you were me and you said it's because this is how I feel, it wouldn't necessarily be enough or wouldn't be accepted enough. But I think now things have gone full circle. So I'm just doing what I want to do. And that's full circle with me as well. And that's why it's working, because it's so sincere and so genuine and so me. I've caught up with myself, and my painting's caught up with me. It's the right thing for my age. And I think if I'd been doing this when I was 35, it wouldn't have been so good. Even if the paintings were exactly the same, it wouldn't have been so good. Now it's at the same level with me. Me and my work are at a good level. And if you are very young and everything runs away and runs ahead of you, out of control, you lose yourself, and you can lose while you're doing it. But if you're 61 and you wake up and you think, oh, I wonder what I'm going to do today, and be really excited about it, it's a fantastic feeling, because there's no cynicism or doubt about why I'm doing it. So, and as a painter or an artist that paints, that's really important, to have that kind of conviction and confidence, because not every painting is going to be good, but it exists, and everything here on these walls exists. So I have to be responsible for it.
Yes, you said earlier on you wanted to conquer painting, and I suppose it's obvious that painting's very difficult, but maybe it needs saying that it's just Van Gogh said it's as difficult to find a good painting as a diamond or a precious stone. I mean, they're rare good paintings, and achieving one's a very difficult task. And I think you said in the summer that it was only a few years ago that you felt you'd really beaten it.
Yeah, well, if anybody here paints, right, and I'm not talking about the big blank canvas, taking that on. I'm talking about the conviction with it and understanding why it should exist and why it should be there. And for me, it was like really after my mum died, and I was painting, and I started painting these paintings of my mum dying, what I remembered her, how she was in bed dying, that I realised how important painting was for me. The ability to pull this from my mind and put it into a canvas and look at it and feel what I was feeling when she was dying is so important. And no one else could do that for me, apart from myself. And if I have that true conviction with that, someone else will look at that painting and understand what I was feeling, and maybe understand their own loss at times of what they're feeling. And that's a really basic answer to it. But the transference of emotion through art is really important because it's nature. Art is nature. Art is like gardening. Art is like growing a beautiful garden, having beautiful flowers, having trees, having leaves, having autumn, having all the seasons, everything. But it's made by us. But it's man-made, woman-made nature. It's our nature. Whereas when we plant our garden and our garden grows, it's nature doing the work. This is us connecting with our nature, our primal. I always say this thing about cave people, right? You know, when they were painting on the walls of the cave, they were not out clubbing each other, you know, to death. While we're making art, we are making a nicer, better, kinder world. It's so obvious because we're nicer, better, kinder people, pushing our senses and our nature to our personal limits of what we can do that's within us, that comes from nature, that comes from nowhere. It's just grown inside us. And it's such a good thing. And at the moment, there isn't enough good things in the world. What has taken over the world is greed. Forget war, just greed. When you're making art, it's got nothing to do with any of those issues. It's got nothing to do with power. It's got nothing to do with greed. It's got nothing to do with triumph. It's got nothing to do with everything which is used against us as humans. Art is the absolute antithesis and opposite of everything which is bad that's created by humans. Art is everything, for me, that is good. And so being an artist right now and making paintings from my head with my hands is so important. More important. I keep saying to people how important art is, and they think I'm sort of exaggerating, or because I'm an artist I'm saying this. I'm not. I'm saying it for everybody who doesn't even make art. The more art we have and the more people we have making beautiful things, the more beautiful and safer the world is going to be. It stands to reason. So that's one reason why I make art. And I realise that. So this is going back to what you said to me. So as I get older, the intention of art and the reason for making it and the reason why I do it is becoming clearer and clearer to me.
Well, I agree with that. Artists are on the side of our better angels. I think that's clear. And at the beginning of this book, I say this thing about how when one stands, if you can manage to get into them, in one of those caves where prehistoric people made paintings, one thing which is immediately obvious, or was to me, is that those people were exactly like us, and the paintings they put on the walls in southwestern France and so forth, they communicate. I mean, they don't communicate their beliefs or their religion or any of that sort of thing, but they communicate nonetheless directly, and painting can do that. It's through time, through 30,000 years. Sometimes painting can do that. I wanted to talk a bit about some of the things that appear in your paintings. In particular, looking at your paintings it struck me as a result that the bed is an under-noted item in art history. There are a lot of beds in the history of painting, and beds are rather important. They're rather important things, and I thought maybe that's why beds so often turn up in your paintings.
No, beds turn up in my paintings because of the golden section. Because once I draw a line through the painting like this, so you've got the leg, you've got this, you've got that, but often it can be the bed, and I can draw this angle of something, or like always, and I can make anything work from that line in the painting, anything I want. And once I realised that actually it was really easy to put a bed around that line at an angle, it then made it really free for me to do whatever I wanted within that space. So it's just a device of a picture plane that I can just spring from and work from. That's one technical, really boring answer. And then the other thing with the bed, it's brilliant because we die in bed, we fuck in bed, we love in bed, we give birth in bed, we shit in bed, we read in bed, we cry in bed. Bed for me, in the last few years, I'll spend too much time in bed probably, but I have to because I need to rest all the time. So my friend refers to my bed as my boffice because I wake up really early and I do lots of things in bed, on my phone, I know. And I always listen to relaxing piano music as well. And I lay in bed and it's my little world before I hit the world, before the world hits me. And I like the coziness, and I have my cats and my tea, and my bed to me is a sanctuary, somewhere where I feel safe, and I love it. And I have really, 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 really mega expensive thread sheets that are they're cotton, but they feel like silk, and it's really indulgent and really soft. And I have really good pillows, and it's somewhere which I spend. I spend about probably 3 days a week in bed, which is a lot. But I have to because I get too tired. So I just get knocked out and then just sleep, wake up, do things in bed, and I love it. So my bed isn't negative. My bed is often, in my mind, is a very positive place. A place not where I retreat to hide, but where I retreat to grow. I love it.
So beds are important play. I mean, as you say, a lot of important things happen to us in beds. Yeah. And not just strange things happen to the beds in your pictures. For example, the waves of the sea seem to sort of wash in underneath them sometimes. The sea actually is another ingredient that comes into your paintings from time to time, in that which is round the corner near the door to this gallery. The sea seems to have surged in underneath into the bedroom.
Well, the sea's in a lot of my work because I live in Margate most of the time, and I swim. And where I swim is by the Turner. It's by Turner Contemporary, and I like it when it's high tide. And then I'll swim all the way around the harbour wall, around the harbour arm. And so it's like a real surreal moment. It's like it's like being in a surrealist painting, actually. It's really strange, and I love it. And I love the sort of mystical moment of it, and the sea and the sky and the horizon and the colours, the green and the grey and all of these things. So it's really implanted in my psyche. And I dream a lot about the sea. I dream often about giant tsunamis, giant waves, and always have done since I was a little girl. And so the sea is really in me, it's part of me, and I love it when like that one over there, there's definitely like a sea horizon, the one that, God knows what the title is, I should know. Just over, you can actually see this horizon, which is very Margate, which is very clear, and then there's the figure in it, which I like, which also looks like mountains. And for a long time I did a whole series of like these mountain paintings, which were figures as well. These sort of landscape figures in mountains.
I was, when you were talking about the emotional impact of paintings, I was thinking, it reminded me of something you said, that you and a friend we have in common, David Dawson, talk about paintings needing the thing. Painting's not good unless it's got the thing. And I wondered what that thing might be. I connected it actually with something Lucian Freud used to say, that a painting's not really good unless it's got a little bit of poison in it. And I said, what could that poison be? And he said, well, for example, mortality might be a bit of poison. Is that the kind of area we're...
Yeah, well, me and David Dawson worked with Lucian Freud for 20 years. He was his assistant. And David and I were at the Royal College of Art together in 1987, and we shared a studio. And we're still really, really close friends, really, really best friends, close friends. And David and I have all spent years and years and years talking about painting. And about 4 or 5 years ago, we realised what it was about what we liked about painting, about a good painting. And what we liked about good painting is it had the thing in it. And that's about as much as we could describe it, the thing. And then we both said, but like the thing, like the horror film with the dog. And yes, that thing. And that goes back to Lucien's, idea of poison. Something like, something uncontrollable, something sort of too much. And sometimes, and with a painting that has the thing in, the painting has a pulse. The painting is alive. It has the thing inside it, and it's trapped, and it's like shaking, and it has an emotional vibrance that is, inside and outside the painting. It's how we react to it when we see it, and it's how also the painting reacts to it when we're looking at it. It's like one of those paintings where the eyes move around the room. It has its own life and its own viscosity and its own kind of like stuff, the thing. So David has worked with Lucien, and David has Lucien's studio, looks after Lucien's studio and the memory of Lucien and all this stuff. And David can paint in Lucien's old studio. And David was doing a painting of me, and we were trying to paint the thing. That's what we wanted. And we were also talking on a spiritual level and on a, understanding that it isn't just about a picture, but it's about this energy from within. And it's fascinating when someone's doing a portrait of someone, that's what they're trying to get from that person. Or a landscape, the landscape must be alive, all of this kind of stuff. So with my paintings, it's more like the emotional thing that has to be in it. So I want you to look at my painting and feel something emotional.
Yeah, that throws some light on the thing, the mysterious thing. It's another thing about paintings is that good paintings never look the same the next time you see them. Every time you look at them, they're different, which is to do with that sort of slightly ghost-like where they shift with energy.
One of the best, I've said this story so many times. I didn't go to the Tate Gallery till I was 22. I know it's late, but I didn't know where the Tate Gallery was even. And it isn't like I was taken there as a child or anything. I had to find it all myself and work it all out. And the first time I went to the Tate, I went in and I was going to look for the monk. I wanted to see the monk. But on my way, I came across this yellow and pink painting, abstract painting. And I didn't even like abstract painting. I like expressionism. I like Munch. I like Egon Schiele. I like Käthe Kollwitz or whatever. This was in 1984. And I was walking through the Tate and I come across this pink and yellow painting. And I just stood there and looked. And I was kind of breathless, and I sat down, and I was staring at it. And I was sitting on a seat looking at it, and I started to cry and cry and cry, and couldn't stop crying. Like big emotional sobs and everything. And then afterwards I went and looked. I looked to see who it was. It was by someone called Mark Rothko. And I looked, and I thought, oh my God. And I didn't understand why I'd been affected by this, but it was like the whole painting was vibrating. And when I got back to college, I went to the library and looked up Mark Rothko, and in this book was like the history of his work. And there was all these figurative religious paintings. And I absolutely loved them. Oh my God, they're so beautiful, they're so beautiful. And then look through, and then it gets into his abstraction. And then I'm reading it, and then I read that he committed suicide. And I was in a state of shock because this pink and yellow painting, to me, was so sad. It was like looking at something, like you look at Munch's painting, The Scream, it's The Scream. But this yellow and pink painting to me was like crying and crying. And I couldn't understand why I was feeling all this. And then when I read about him, it was kind of obvious, so obvious. I felt his emotion through that painting. I could feel it, and I knew nothing about Rothko. I knew nothing about abstract painting, and it wasn't like, I could hardly be clever, because I was crying and crying and crying. And also I thought maybe it was the effect of going to the Tate and being emotionally overwhelmed by being where I wanted to be. And then the first thing I see that to me is really emotional and true art. And it got me, it stopped me, it got me. And as I'm telling the story, I'm still seeing this 22-year-old girl, or how old was I? Yeah, 22-year-old girl sitting there. It was in 1983, I can't remember. Sitting there crying, looking at this painting. And in a way, it's really sad, but it's so beautiful. It's amazing to have an experience like that, looking at a painting.
And Rothko would have been very pleased to hear that.
Yeah.
Talking about Rothko reminded me about scale, which is something I thought about looking at this exhibition, because you've got very big pictures, you've got small pictures, you've got medium-sized pictures. Do you approach them differently? How does that work?
Well, I go into the studio, we mix and paint up. Harry goes, "What are you doing?" I go, "Red." So we get some red paint, and then I'll sort of walk around the studio, and then I just start on a really big one, and then I might have some little tiny canvases, and then I just paint them all out red, all of them. Then I'll paint all the little ones out white, and then I'll get some pink and put some pink on a big one, then put some pink on the tiny ones, and it builds up like that. And then the little ones stop, and I just have a ground, and they might stay like that for a year or something. And then when I'm feeling a little bit cozy or whatever, especially in London, I sit down at my table, my desk, with all the little canvases, and one by one I start working on them. And maybe out of 10, maybe 4 work, 3 don't, so I have to paint over them. Sometimes the little ones if you can have a really, really thick paint, some of them you can see all the brush marks underneath were really battled. And there's some that are just white with just a line on, but you can see there's loads of pictures underneath where I've worked on it again and again and again. So sometimes the big ones come much easier than the tiny ones. And what's brilliant about big ones is we didn't finish this, I was saying about baselets and everything, is that you can paint. With the big ones, you can really and I always say it's like being a conductor. You load up the paint and you can really, really paint. Whereas with the tiny ones, obviously you can't because it's myopic and you're looking into it. But I love it when I see images in a book or digital images and you can't tell if they're big or small. So some of the really big ones look like they're small watercolours, and some of the tiny ones look like they're really big paintings loaded up with really thick paint, but they're not. So.
And sometimes in the big ones, there are sort of two scales going on. There's a sweeping brushstrokes. There are also quite intricate patterning going on. And how does that come about?
The intricate patterning, when I was at the Royal College of Art, my second subject there was sacred geometry. And because I really loved sort of Sufism and Eastern esoterics and miniature painting and a lot of Turkish, become Cypriot, half Cypriot. I loved a lot of I loved all the Sufis, the Whirling Dervish, all that kind of thing. And because there was sacred geometry right next door to my studio with Keith Critchlow, I made that my second subject. So I really loved learning about sacred geometry and Islami and all those things. And also, as a device in my paintings when I was at the Royal College of Art, I did these carpets and painted all these intricate carpets, but then quite expressionistic kind of figures. And when I haven't been very well, last year, I wasn't well, I couldn't really paint, but I really wanted to paint. So Harry pulled up my high chair and we put the painting up high and I had a tiny brush and I just sat there painting all these carpet patterns across my really giant canvases. And I love it. It's like what I was doing 35 years ago, but I'm back to doing it. And some of these patterns are just like a mental, like it's massive. It's like clearing all my mind out, and it's just such a fantastic thing to do, these patterns. It was a show I had before at Xavier Hofkins Gallery where I had a lot of the paintings with all the carpets and patterns in. Well, I'm so happy doing it. I love it. Because people who know me really well, I doodle all the time, and I doodle all of these, like, sort of everything from crystal shapes, patterns, these Limi patterns. I just do it. I've always have done it. So it's part of my what I do, but it's definitely coming into my work again now, so I'm really happy about that.
So, word you use a lot about when talking about painting is alchemy, which is a word which is actually quite a few people use about painting, that it's transformation of something into something else. Alchemists make base metals into gold or change elements, and so there's a sort of magic going on there. You're making something into.
Well, with the alchemy, so I did printmaking degree. I did a printmaking degree, and I got into painting, but I love printmaking. And they said to me, if you had a choice between printmaking and painting, what would you do? And I chose printmaking because I love the alchemy of it. I love the process of the chemicals, and I love the magic of it all. And painting to me didn't have that magic because it was just to me. I just thought it was me and the paint, like going like this. I didn't understand that there could be an alchemy. And then now, of course, I totally understand there is. There's something so magical about painting. It's incredible. And I love the otherworldliness of it. And I'm often talking about the alchemy of art in itself, because it's magical. It's what I was saying earlier. It's magical, it's otherworldly, but it belongs to us. And colours are alchemic. I'm quite strict with my colours.
Well, I was interested you used that word because it was a word people persistently, endlessly used about Rembrandt, and particularly in the 19th century. Rembrandt's a magician, Rembrandt's an alchemist, Rembrandt's transmuting this mud into something wonderful.
It's making shit into gold, isn't it? Something out of nothing. One of my best tsunami dreams was that I was surfing on top of a giant wave of shit, and I was surfing and having to balance like this, and everything below me was shit, and I was surfing on top, on the crest of this shitty wave. And I think, like in life, that's what life is like a lot of the time. And with painting, you can be painting, and it can be all going terribly wrong and everything, and then suddenly, boom, something happens, and it all goes into place, and it all makes sense, and the whole world makes sense. And then another time, you can be painting, and I'll honestly, I would say to Harry, fuck, I've got to paint over it, because if something happens to me tonight, and that's my last painting I've ever done, I can't cope with it. I can't cope. And I'm really, really strong about this, about what you put down and how it remains, and how, I said this earlier, about how responsible you are for it. As an artist, when we're younger, you think it gives you an excuse to be totally irresponsible when you're young. And then as you get older, for me, as an artist, it makes me realise how responsible you have to be, because I'm putting these things into the world, and they're probably going to stay here long after I'm gone. So I'm just making them. I'm just the maker, the deliverer. And because of that, there's custodians, we don't know how long we're all going to be around for, the world or anything, but right now I've got to accept that they're going to be around a lot longer than me. And like when I did the doors at the National Portrait Gallery, I wasn't nervous about it. I was kind of quite clear-headed, because I really took on the responsibility of knowing those doors are going to be around for a long, long time. And the paintings will be around for as long as they're looked after. So a really quick Louise Bourgeois story. I was friends with Louise, and Louise made these giant marble sculptures, and nobody wanted them, and she couldn't afford to keep them. So what she did was she bought this piece of scrubland in Long Island, just a piece of sandy land by the coast, and she buried the marble sculptures in the sand, which is incredible because you could just cut up all the marble into pieces and distribute it. And she didn't really want to get rid of her sculptures, so she just buried them in the sand, in these sand dunes that she'd bought. Anyway, the sand dunes were in the Hamptons, and they were worth an incredible lot of money. And by the time Louise dug up her marbles, they were worth a lot of money as well. And so was the piece of land that she'd bought in the Hamptons, which was worth nothing when she bought it when she was young. But she just bought it to protect her sculptures. She was the she looked after, and I just think this is a really great story about having some kind of faith and how it came back to her and, you know, helped her later on. I know. And I think when you make big paintings, I've got to accept that they're not going to sell necessarily. People aren't going to want, who's going to want, I don't want to have sex because my body feels dead on their wall, you know. It's got to be a really good, hardcore, great art person to want that. And so if I have to have it, I have to look after it. I have to be responsible for everything I make. I have to know that I will, if I have to take care of it. And all the paintings, there's hardly any hanging in my house. I find living with art quite difficult because my brain, I make lots of images all the time and I see everything in images. So I need to be calm all the time. So it's hard for me to have things everywhere around me. So that all the paintings of mine that I have are mine in my house. I have to buy it. I have to more or less buy it to be able to have it. Otherwise I won't have it. So once I've bought it and it's in my head and it's hanging on my walls, nobody else can have it. And then I will always be responsible for that and look after it. No one else will look after it.
So David Hockney thought that the main reason why things survive is either because A, they're made out of something so hard it's very difficult to destroy them, or B, because somebody loves them. And it's the latter which usually applies to works of art, particularly paintings.
Yeah, but you imagine how much art's been made in this world, how much art is being made right now as we speak. Where does it all go?